Today is January 30th, 2015. My name is Joe Todd. This is an interview with Dean Haberly in Dewey, Oklahoma. Sir, where were you born?
Bartlesville.
When's your birthday?
2/9/48.
February 9th?
February 9th,
Okay.
1948.
Who's your father?
Dean E. Haberly.
And your mother?
Lola Edwards Haberly.
You say Lola?
Lola.
Okay. Did you go through school in Bartlesville?
Graduated class of 66, Call High. Still a Wildcat.
Yeah. What elementary school did you go to?
Lincoln,
Lincoln.
right over on First Street.
In your schooling, who was your favorite teacher?
I didn't have one. They all didn't like me, so it's hard to say. Probably Mr. Hathaway out at College High School. He was my drafting teacher, and he's the one that got me started in that road of education. So
You play sports at school?
up until about the 9th grade, football and basketball, and then after that, Mom and Dad thought I ought to knuckle down to school. So.
In high school, what'd you do for recreation?
Chase girls. We had all sorts of things going on. Our church group was big. It had a lot of kids all the same age. And there was always something going on. Softball, baseball, played a lot of baseball. Swam a little bit at the high school for the team there. Always loved the water. So.
Have a good team? Swimming team?
Yeah, we did. We had the team was state quality all the way through. Newman was the coach out there, and for several years, Bartlesville was tough to beat in the pool. So,
Yeah, they were state champs, and I was going there.
yeah.
You climbed the mound? Did you climb the mound?
Oh man, we lived on the mound if we could. Favorite place, especially about the 5th or 6th grade, when you kind of get mobile, and you may have a bicycle, you may not. Out to the mound, and of course it was nothing like it is now. And that was the best place to catch a horny toad. We go out there and catch those little horny toads from that big up, You get a little one, you stick it in your shirt pocket and it never move, it'd stay there, and we'd take them to school and trade toads. But yeah, we spent a lot of time on the mound. That was, for a West Side kid, that's where you went.
What? I guess they had the water tank up there, didn't they?
It had a tank, but of course it was a small one.
Yeah.
And there were no restrictions like there are now, but no fences around that you could get there. In the wintertime, when ice and snow came, it wasn't the best place to slide down because of all the rocks. I mean, you think you had a path, and then a big old rock and toss you out. So.
Now, where did you live in those years?
I lived on Penn,
In
in Bartlesville, right there. I lived 2 houses away from Douglas School.
Okay.
On 3rd, 4th, and Penn.
Okay.
And we spent most of our life, my growing up life, until I moved to Central, and then we moved over on 13th Street.
You climbed Circle Mountain.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
What'd you do up there?
Looked around and thought, man, that's pretty cool. Of course, if you had a girl going with you, you could, but yeah, we did that. So.
Smell or smoke?
If according to a lot of people, I should be dead, but I'm not, and so should everybody else on the west side of Bartlesville. Also, Connie tailings. My folks, Sandy's folks, their driveways were Connie tailings. I've got scars on my knees from falling down in the driveway and embedding Connie tailings.
Now, what are Connie tailings?
Come from the smelters. They're the liners that line the furnaces out there, and they get real fire tested, and they break real easy, and they break into real nice little granules, and they make really good paving for a driveway. You put gravel down, then you put tailings on top of it, and it just really makes a good driveway. A lot of the streets in Bartlesville were done that way.
Now, what do they make at the smelters?
They refine zinc and cadmium, and they also made hydrofluoric acid. So they had about 3 main products out there. My dad worked in the acid plant. Sandy's dad worked on the furnace. And those guys would work only 4-hour days. It was so hot in there that they couldn't take a whole lot of it. So they worked 4-hour days. A lot of times they go out and maybe work 3 hours and get everything done they needed to do, and they go home.
Yeah.
And a lot of them had second jobs. They had to, you know, back in the day when money was tough. So
Why were the smelters in Bartlesville?
it came here, I'm not quite sure when, but there was one in Kansas, and there may still be one in Kansas. There was one in, I think in Muscatine, Iowa. Why it ended up here, I really don't know, because of course when I was born, that's where my dad worked. And I guess labor was here. Sandy's grandfather came over from Sweden in 1902, and he was a smelter worker, and that's where he went to work, and that's where all of his boys worked. And so there was the Swedes out there, and the Polish, you know, the little, well, your heritage.
Oh, yeah.
So you know where the little encampments were, the ethnic groups that made the smelters.
Yep.
So
They all shop at Gus Minitch's.
yeah. Yeah.
So, Mrs. Grant at Lincoln School.
Oh my.
Tell me about
Fourth grade.
Tell me about her.
The meanest woman I've ever seen, except for maybe Mrs. Sayre. She was pretty tough. Mrs. Hadley was tough. Mrs. Grant was the music teacher. And the most common thing I remember about her, she said one day, she said, "I need you all to bring a golf ball to school." Where's a West Side kid gonna get a golf ball, you know? So we all scrounged up golf balls, and she thought we needed to learn how to count music, you know, 4/4 time, 3/4 time, you know, 2/4 time. So we'd take the ball, get up in a line, and everybody would go bounce 2, 3, 4, bounce 2, 3, 4, or bounce 1, 2, bounce. And you know, guys, and inevitably, we'd get to try to bounce the ball over to the next guy, switch balls, and the next thing you know, where's the golf ball at? Going all over the room, and Mrs. Grant would come unglued. The funny story about that was, Sandy's dad and his brother had Mrs. Grant as a teacher. Now that tells you how old she was. I think she had one son, and somehow I remember several years back he finally died. But Mrs. Grant was ancient.
Yes.
Yeah.
She was my music teacher.
Oh, there you go. I mean, you know, it's like, and did you do the bouncing golf balls? You know.
Yes, we did.
Okay, yes. And one other, I don't remember what class it was, and I don't remember who the teacher was, but we had to bring a bar of soap to school, and we carved this soap into horses or something like that for some kind of a project, and I kind of remember that. But, we played a lot of basketball over there. Had a pretty good team. We'd go to Jefferson and McKinley and stuff like that, and usually win the area championship at the end. So
who was principal at Lincoln?
Leslie Stewart.
Leslie Stewart
was the principal.
Did you tell me about him?
Very nice guy. Very educated person. Nice to get along with. Never had trouble with him. I went to see him a time or two, but now Dean's, you straighten up. Of course, he knew my mom and dad, and back in that day, they had PTA, and the teachers and the principals were, sometimes I wondered how my folks knew what I did before I ever got there. So, and it's through the system,
Well, in those days, if you got trouble in school, you got trouble at home.
Oh, no, yeah. I got 3 licks one day in the first grade, right off the bat. I can't tell why. It's one of those stories that it was good, and I won't tell you who it was involved with. Back to the cloakroom back there, go in one door and out the other down there, and whack, whack, whack. So they said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I'm going to go home and tell." I said, "It's not going to make it any easier if I stretch it out, because they're going to know anyway." Dad gets home. Mom was not the disciplinarian. She said, "Wait until your daddy gets home." And it was that way. So he said, "What'd you do?" And I said, "This is what I did." And when I told him what happened, he got tickled. He says, "Well, I told you." So he had a little black leather belt, and you could hear it when it came out. He doubled it over, and he says, "Bend over." And he actually, I think, cut me some slack because of what happened. And he said, "Now don't forget, you get any more." And I never got another. That was it. First grade.
Did you play around the old ruins of the old smelters?
Not much. No, not much. We didn't venture out that way too much. Dad says, "Don't go out there." We played at the shale pit.
Yes. Tell me, what is a shale pit?
Well, it was there behind, and actually where the Swim at Frontier pool is now. Was a huge hole in the ground where they used to take out shale, blue shale or gray shale. I'm not sure which it was, but it of course eventually started to fill up with water, and the water was just gin clear in there all the time. It's full of perch and different kinds of fish. It was a magnet for kids, but it was also a death trap. I don't remember how many kids actually drowned in there before they put a fence up. But even when the fence went up, folks would go in there, and if you were down in the pit, you couldn't be seen from the road. And they'd go in there and fish anyway, catch fish and take them out. But when they put the chain link fence up around it, we'd go, that big field all the way down to Clayman's scrapyard was open. We'd fly our kites and tie our kites off on that chain link fence and just leave them until they came down. But right now I understand the boys club is wanting to expand their facility, and part of coming to the west from the old boys club puts them in that pit area, which they fill with rubble and stuff, and it's unsuitable for their building, so they've got to do some looking further to the south.
Yeah, there'd be nothing to build on.
Yeah, the ground's probably unstable. I'm surprised the swimming pool's there.
Yeah.
But maybe it was. I don't know. But that was part of our neighborhood, and we played there a lot. And then old Max Clayman had the deal there, and so once in a while we get a wild hare. If we got some lumber, especially, we get some 1-bys or 2-bys, fairly wide, some 2x4s. We get the bright idea to build us a car. Well, you have to have axles. So Well, when Max and them shut down, we go over and look for steel rods long enough to make axles and 4 wheels, and maybe we get 4 of the same kind, the same diameter, and a bolt down through there, and put you lean back and put your feet on it, and steer it with your feet, and somebody push. And then in the neighborhood down there, of course, we're all baby boomers. We're all war babies right after the war, and the neighborhood down there, everybody knew everybody. So on a given day, there would be 7 or 8 boys out there in the street looking for something to do. Now the girls, they kind of stayed to the house, but we'd be out there looking for something to do, so we'd run that car up and down the road until we just flat wore it out, and then we'd try to find more wheels over there, and then it was, we liked to go to the railroad track. I miss today hearing the trains go by. We lived where there was a train coming down the track early in the morning, late at night, and so we go to the tracks and watch the trains go by. And then of course the neighborhood started changing. There was a ramp on the northwest corner of Douglas School. It was a big set of double doors, and a ramp came down and it went across the street, and Ida Lee's house was on the corner, and we were the next house. And we'd run that car down that ramp, and you'd have to make a real quick turn right or left. You hit the curb and boom, over you go. And when it got cold, if we didn't get ice, we'd take buckets over there and pour down that thing and make our slide, you know. And in the summertime, had a good baseball field behind that building back there. It was all fenced and everything, so that's where we played baseball.
Behind Douglas School?
Douglas. Mm-hmm. Douglas School. Mm-hmm. And it was really strange. I really never understood integration and segregation. And of course, we were right there at it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. In the summertime, we played baseball with black guys over there all summer long. They filter out a 7th and down in there, and we'd meet at the ball field, play ball. Mm-hmm. I think it was in the 5th or 6th grade. I still see those guys today. Some of them. I played with them at the boys' club when we were younger too. And I asked Mom. I said, "Mom, how come those black kids go to school here at Douglas and we go over here to Lincoln?" So she explained to me it was still segregated. I thought, not right. Those are my friends over here. Those are my friends up there. And I think it was 1958 or 59, maybe 60 when integration came along. It was 1960, I think. We were in the 6th grade going on to the 7th grade. And I never will forget, and it surprised me. I don't like speaking ill, but our principal at Lincoln stood up and said, I resign. Because in '61 he would have had black kids in his school. He said, I won't have blacks in my school. So therefore my view kind of went downhill. But that's where I grew up. Yeah. I mean, those are my friends, and that's the way it is.
Bill Lincoln was one of my best friends.
Yep.
Yeah, did you know him?
I knew the name.
Yeah, he went to Vietnam. He died out in California.
Did he?
He's buried in White Grove Cemetery now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When it got really hot in the summertime, there was a black gentleman named Gibbs that was the custodian of the school. Mm-hmm. He'd see us out there playing ball and sweating and everything, and he'd open that back door and holler, "Come on in here." And of course, we'd all flock in there because it still had the water coolers on and the water was cold and everything, and we'd go in and cool off. He might have some little chore for us to do and everything, so we'd help him out. And they had one of the best gymnasiums in the country around there at that time. They had one of the best hardwood floors. And at the south end of it had a ramp and a set of double doors that came down into that gym. And he showed us one day, he said, you guys get on this, those chair hauler carts. It's got 4 posts, you know, on each, 2 on each end. And it's got a wheel in the middle that kind of balances it, and it's got wheels on the end. We get black guy, white guy, black mixed on that thing, and somebody would push it down that ramp, and we keep it balanced until we get down there, and then we'd all lean one way or the next, and that second set of wheels would kick in, and that thing would start going like this, and it'd sling you off out there on that gym floor. We had a ball. We just had a ball. You know, it was just more fun, and I miss the school's gone. You know, I don't know what you do with it. It turned into a better place, but you know, you kind of miss it.
Have you been to Lincoln School since they've redone it?
No, I haven't. It's all ARC now, isn't it?
No.
Oh, you're talking about Lincoln.
Lincoln.
Oh, STS, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I've been in there.
Yeah, they tore Lincoln down.
Yeah.
I mean,
Douglas.
They tore Douglas.
Douglas was torn down. Lincoln was turned into Vasudevans Engineering Company. Yeah, I've been over there several times. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go to Sand Creek?
Oh yeah.
What to do there?
We fished. I was bit by the fishing bug early, but mostly I fished below the dam up there on the Caney River Bridge, in that fast water right there. My mom would say, "Where are you going?" And I'd have a pole in one hand, and I'd go up to Mr. Penny's, right there, just west of the Douglas School on Penn. He sold worms. Come up there with whatever change we could come up with and get as much worms as we could get, and we went fishing. And we spent hours down there. I know every little rock crevy in there, waded in there, and you know, and Mom would say, "What are you doing?" "Oh, no, we down there fishing." Well, by the time we got home, we dried off, you know.
Yeah, I learned to swim in Sand Creek.
Yeah.
I went to the Y, but I learned to swim in Sand Creek.
We learned to swim in Sand Creek, yeah. There were lots of things to do around here that I don't think you could do today.
No.
You know.
What do you do 4th of July?
4th of July, usually for us, I had an uncle that lived in California. And that, 4th of July was the time that he usually came back to Oklahoma. And so we'd get to see the 2 cousins from California, and we'd usually gather up at my grandma and grandpa's, which was 3 houses north of us. My Uncle Ellis lived over on the corner of 14th and Maple, and my Aunt Fay lived down at Stigler, Oklahoma. We'd either end up at Stigler or up at Grandma and Grandpa's when they were still alive. And I can still remember Grandpa saying, "Go out in the wash," and where they lived had a wash house with a cistern and a pump, you know, a water crank. Get that number 3 out there, and get out there, and we'll be back in a little bit. And they went down to the ice plant and got ice, come back with bags of ice and watermelons. Put it in that tub and start icing it over. Then pretty soon my dad would come out and say, "Come here, boys," and I had a shade tree out there. He'd fixed up the old wooden crank ice cream, and they'd put the salt on the ice and salt it up and say, "Here, you guys turn this till you can't turn it no more." So my brother and I'd take turns, or my cousins, if they were there already, which they usually were, would take turns cranking the ice cream. And then that's what we did. We had a big get-together on 4th of July. And at that time, all we did was just go right out in front of the house in the street and shoot fireworks. Everybody up and down the street was doing the same thing. There were no restrictions on shooting fireworks. You could just shoot them in the street. And Dad would say, now boys, after this is over, you got to clean that street up. So we had to go clean up all the residue out there. But that was 4th of July normally for us. Everybody showed up.
What you do on Memorial Day?
Well, Memorial Day was a little different. As usual, you had to go to the cemetery. And I'm thinking, as a kid, you think, well, go to the cemetery. Well, that's what we did normally. It was a pretty quiet time. We didn't do a lot of celebrating, but we just took it easy. So.
What about Christmas?
Oh my, we had 2 Christmases. Actually, we had 3 Christmases. My grandparents lived in Independence. My dad is from Independence. And so we would have Christmas with us, go down the street to Grandma and Grandpa Edwards down there and have a little, very simple. And then the next day we got in the car and headed up that old, call it a highway, but it was snaking around up through there to get to Independence. And my dad's 2 brothers lived in Wichita and worked for Boeing. And so they'd bring their families down and we'd meet at Grandma and Grandpa's. And we'd have another Christmas there and see the Wichita cousins. And we did that until my grandpa died early. He's 59 from stomach cancer, and Grandma just trudged right on. And so we had Christmas as long as Grandma was able. She lived to be 93. And what was funny, when my brother and I got old enough, Mom and Dad would take us down down to the railroad tracks to the station, tell the conductor, these 2 boys are going to Independence. Put us on the train. Grandma and Grandpa would be standing there and take us off the train, and we'd stay a week up there in the summertime. Well, of course we're growing, and my brother always started stuff. I never did, but we would get up there, and then my grandpa died, and so about the first year after he died, Dad says, Mom says, you want these 2 together? And she said, yeah, send them on up. They won't be any sweat. So, and we probably 9, 10, 8 to 10, something like that. Brother's just almost 2 years younger than I am. And so when they put us back on the train to come back, Grandma sent a note. Says, better have them one at a time next year. Because I gather we'd get a little rowdy for her.
What were your grandparents' names that lived here on Maple?
The grandparents?
Yeah.
My grandparents were James, Oscar, Edwards, and Rose Edwards. They lived on Penn right there in the middle.
Okay.
Now my uncle that lived on Maple.
Oh, that's your uncle. I'm sorry.
Was Ellis Edwards.
Okay.
Ed Edwards sold cars for Van Zant forever.
Yeah.
He was a car salesman.
Because my grandparents lived there.
Yeah.
On Maple.
Yeah. Ed and Jack, they called her Jack, lived right on the corner. We come off 14th Street and turn right on Maple, right there on the corner.
Okay.
Yeah, and he sold, he sold Studebakers and all kind, whatever, Van Zant, and I think he even sold for Guy Belt Buick off and on.
My father had Todd Salvage.
Uh-huh.
And my brother and I would cut up cars, and I hated when Dad would buy a Studebaker.
Really?
Cut up, but those things were built like a tank.
Tank. I'm telling you, they were. Dad got us, my brother and I was almost 16, a 49 Studebaker pickup. Engine was locked up. Didn't know the first thing about it. Pulled it in the garage out there. Took the motor down. Popped everything out. And took it down and had it honed out and rebuilt it. First thing, fired right up. That's the first vehicle I ever drove when I turned 16. It had a 3 on the floor, and it had real iron in it. I mean, that thing had iron in it. If you could catch on to it in first, it had compound, second, and third. That's all it had. If you could latch onto it, you could pull it. And we ended up, we painted it Honduras maroon, and finally, Dad, somebody offered him more money for it than he wouldn't turn down. So it went its way after we fixed it all up. But we had fun with it while we had it. So.
Who was the oldest person you knew in Bartlesville in those years?
Probably my Aunt Lola and my Uncle Furman were, but here again at Virginia Avenue, there were lots of old people. And of course, that's where we grew up. My Aunt Lola and Uncle Furman had a grocery store. F.H. England was his name. England Grocery, right there in the middle of the block between Santa Fe and, was it Cheyenne? Next one west. There was a Pimco station. Yeah.
I think maybe Cheyenne.
Yeah. There's a Pimco station right across the street, and it's a white 2-story building. And it has a little stucco building set next to it. My Uncle Bert had a car lot there and sold cars. Bert McClinic. And so that was a grocery store, and it had apartments above it that they rented out. And Bert sold cars out of that little building right there.
So in Santa Fe, and on
Frank Phillips.
Frank Phillips.
3rd Street.
Okay.
3rd Street for you and I.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, right there, when you hit Santa Fe, there's a house on the corner, and there's the alley, and there's a 2-story white building still standing there today. It was a ceramic shop for a while.
Yes.
And Sandy and I, when we were married, that apartment right above was where we lived, right there.
They had that restaurant there called the Denver House.
Yes, that's the corner house. Okay. It was in there, right there by the alley. There's a house, and then the Denver House was right there.
Yeah.
That's where it was.
Okay.
Yeah, and they ran that grocery store for years and years.
Is that where you shop mainly? The grocery store?
No. Every corner had a mom and pop store on it. We had Marples over on 1st Street. You had Garen's on 1st Street. You had Sandstone building out there on Cudahy, I think it was. I'm trying to think what the name of that one was. All the mom and pop stores is where you usually shopped. And then 7-Eleven opened up on 3rd Street. And then, of course, Bill's Supermarket went in and was one of the biggest ones around. And when I was 14, I went to work for Bill's, sacking groceries and stocking shelves. And so that's where mainly, back when I really remember up until we moved to 13th Street, that's where we did most of our shopping. Mm-hmm. And that's our neighborhood. And of course, Tasty Freeze opened up on the corner across the street from it, and at that time there was a row of houses there on Frank Phillips. Wareheim's was down another block there, and we go down there, and Dave and Virginia and me, you know.
That's about where Sonic is now.
Yep, right on that corner.
Because we'd walk in and she was always in that rocking chair.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Overalls and a rocking chair.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's that corner, and you could always walk in there, and if you had a nickel, you could go over to that cold water pop box, Coca-Cola pop box, and lift the lid, pick what you wanted, and slide it out and slide it over, and drop your nickel in, you get your cold pot.
Now, there was a Hammond's grocery
Yes,
by Lincoln.
down by Lincoln. It was well, you know where the Cardinal it was on the corner?
Yes.
It was right across the street. Not on the corner, but about in the middle of the block right there.
Is that where the fire station is now? In that area?
No, it's across the street.
Across the street.
Yeah, it was
Okay.
across the
Okay.
street.
Okay.
There was a church that sat there on that corner, a white church at one time. And Hammond's was across the street. Well, it was actually almost straight across the street from the school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I used to go to that.
Yeah, and with wood floors.
Yep.
Yeah,
My lunch period, I go over to that store.
that's where yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And then we called him Uncle Bob, but Elmer and Bob Robertson opened the grocery store that was the Cardinal.
Yes.
And of course we'd go down there too.
That's a church now, that building. That building's a church now, isn't it?
Well, it's a church now. It was an arrow shop. It's
Yeah.
been all kinds
It's
of
been
things.
all sorts of stuff, yeah.
Yeah, but it opened up and it had a door on the north side of it in the back corner there off of the alley. And we'd go from school over there and run across the street and run down there, and there's an alley, and the Whites lived here, and I can't think of the name. Anyway, we go in that back door, and that's where we get our candy.
Mm-hmm.
Elmer and Bob, Elmer was a deacon at the church there at Virginia Avenue, and so was Bob. And their mother was the oldest daughter of my aunt in Stigler, my Aunt Faye.
Okay.
So she and my mom were cousins, Frenchie and Bob Robertson, and Elmer and Desi. And so we had local ties there. You know.
Did you know old lady Laddie?
I had heard the name, but I didn't.
She lived on West 14th,
Mm-hmm.
about where this side of Bonham Trucking, and she was a big bootlegger.
Yeah.
And when I was a kid, we could buy whiskey bottles, and she'd buy them from us.
And she'd buy them from
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
You know Joe Barber?
I know Joe. I'd met him one time
Yeah.
way back when. He was a character.
Yes. He'd always come down to salvage.
Yep.
That guy was a genius.
Oh, he was smart.
On anything electronic,
Yep.
not radios, record
Mhm.
players. The man
Mhm.
was a genius.
Yep. He was another one of the town characters.
Yep.
Of course, we all had him. We remember Smiley.
Oh yes. And his brother was Zeke.
Zeke.
Did
Yep.
you know him?
I'd see him, and
Zeke.
they'd say, yeah.
He walked from here to Tulsa.
Yeah, you'd see him on the highway.
Yes.
Yeah,
He got hit by a car.
yeah,
Yeah.
I know, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Then there was another guy that we called Platehead. We didn't know. Somebody said, Platehead. He always riding a bicycle, rigid, straight up. He rode like this all the time. We didn't know why, but the story was that he'd been in a car accident or something, and he had a steel plate in his head, and he never would get in the car again, so he rode that bicycle. I don't know what his name was, I don't know who he was.
Mm-hmm.
Then some of the other characters was the Syrup brothers. You know who they were?
Tell me.
Okay. When you go out Sunset Boulevard and you made the curve and dropped down right there, right there on your right was two guys that sat there and waved at everybody,
Yes.
thick and thin. One was heavy set and one was skinny as a rail. Leroy, Sandy's dad, told us that when they were kids they were still there, and they called them the Syrup brothers, thick and thin.
That's around where Lupa is.
Yeah, right there, where Lupa comes in and it starts down.
Yep.
Their house was right there, and they'd sit on the end of that porch out there, and people were going by where they could see him. The car would come by, and about the same time they'd both go. You know, just kind of together. They go like that. They wave. I've heard their names, but I Leroy tell us what their names were, so, but I can't remember.
Did you know Three Fingers Brown?
No.
He had 3 fingers, and he was another big bootlegger.
Yeah.
On the west side of town.
Yeah.
One of his daughters married Sylvester Tinker.
Yeah.
Chief of the Osages.
When Leroy grew up, he grew up on Busey, right there on the east side of Busey, in the middle of the block between 1st and 3rd Street, or 2nd Street. Yeah, there's a little 2nd Street goes right there, but it dead ends in Busey. Little house right there. His dad had a stable there. He had a horse barn stable. That's what they started out doing when they first came here in 1902. Mm-hmm. And when Leroy was young, there were 12 kids, 7 boys and 5 girls. And they didn't have anything. They were just scruffy kids trying to make it, you know. And across the street lived a Indian family, and their name was Blackhawk. Ed and Elsie Blackhawk. Well, Elsie was a bootlegger. So the boys would go up and gather out bottles. Well, they were looking for whiskey bottles, but she'd take anything, and she'd sell them 2 cents a piece, give them 2 cents a piece for the bottle. And Leroy said he had been known to make deliveries for her. And they had since, and until Ed and Elsie both died, were close friends. They finally moved out into the Osage on 420 acres out there. But anyway, Elsie and Ed Blackhawk, Leroy said lots of times he wouldn't have gotten milk if it hadn't been for Elsie. And his brothers the same way. Because she made sure they got milk. But she'd buying the bottles.
You play on the shackle rods?
Play what?
On the shackle rods.
Yeah. On the wells?
Yeah, the old oil well, shackle rod oil wells.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. When the roundhouse was going, mm-hmm. the rods were running. You'd try to ride them. Yeah. You know. I bought a piece of land up in Kansas. The roundhouse is still there. The building itself is gone, but all the big equipment is still there. And we spent days cleaning up the shackle rod, and they would take a piece of a Bodart Osage orange post and drive it in the ground and set a shackle rod right on top of it. And eventually that rod would eat a groove right down into that, and that's what they used to guide them with, keep them up off the ground. I've got lots of those left around out there.
Ever play around the old bump jacks?
Not much, mm-hmm. Not much. Dad says, boys, you're going to hear people saying they rode the pump jack. Don't do it. And I scared my dad, so I didn't do it.
What about the powerhouse?
We'd go by them every once in a while, but...
I remember at night you could hear those things going all night long.
All night long.
In fact, I remember one night I woke up, my brother woke up, folks woke up, mm-hmm. the whole neighborhood woke up. Mm-hmm. We realized
it wasn't running.
The pump house quit.
Yeah. It's what puts you to sleep and get there. That's right. It's like the train going by. You knew when it was, but a lot of nights you didn't hear it.
Where were you when Kennedy was assassinated?
We were in Central Junior High School at, I was trying to think what class I was in. Sandy, I think she can tell you exactly to the minute and time. I know I was there. I was first floor down that first main hall in a classroom right there, and I think it was American history when the announcement came. Well, you know, bad deal. But I don't think I shed a tear. It wasn't, I didn't know the guy, you know. So, but it was sad time for our country.
Was Mrs. Cook still the history teacher?
Cook, that's her name.
Yes, I had her.
Yeah, tall, skinny gal.
Yes, yes.
That's who it was.
Was
Yeah.
Mr. Lee still principal?
Oh my, yes. Oh. The paddle. Luckily enough, I escaped his ire, but I know some who didn't. Business suit, but he had this paddle in the back pocket. You couldn't see it. It seems to me it was about this wide and about that long, had a handle, and had air vent holes in it, so he could really get the swing on it. Yeah.
What'd you do after high school?
Right after high school, I went to Oklahoma State Tech in Okmulgee. Sandy and I were dating at that time, and I wanted to be a draftsman. So I put together enough money working at Bill's. I helped pay myself through school, and I went down to Oklahoma State Tech at Okmulgee and took the drafting course down there. And so as life went along, that was in '67, early '67s when I started. It was a 2-year course. Sandy and I got married on April the 20th of 1968, and she had been at work she graduated up here at Dewey on Friday night and went to work for Phillips on Monday morning. So she had more than a year, and I had a semester left in school. So I'd come home on the weekend and then go back through the week and go to school. She came in and said, "I'm going to buy a car." And I said, "Okay, what are you buying?" She bought a '67 Mustang. Boy, we thought we were in tall cotton. '68, we got married. April the 20th, we got married. I still had that semester to go, so she's walking down the street every day to Phillips from our apartment right there on 3rd Street. I'm taking the car and heading to Okmulgee to go to school. Stayed in the barracks down there. That was an old military at one time, and had just barracks off of Central Hall and a barracks. And several friends of mine from Bartlesville here went to school with Kenny Seals, Mike Rickman, several others from here. And so in January of 70, just graduated school, got home and had a real high draft number. I didn't think I was going to get drafted. Got a little piddling job. It wasn't what I wanted. Wasn't going to be doing. And went in one day, and there's that old envelope. Opened it up and said, "Your friends and neighbors have selected you." Well, you got one probably too, or did you get drafted? You signed it?
I got my draft notice in Vietnam.
Oh my goodness!
I'm a draft dodger.
You're an RA. Yeah, I'm a US. And so that threw our world into a turmoil. Mm-hmm. And
when'd you get that letter?
Huh?
When'd you get that letter?
February. Yeah, I don't remember actually the date. Got it in February.
Of 60.
Of 70.
Of 70.
And was gone by March. Yeah, February, and I'm gone. Oklahoma City loaded and gone.
Where'd you go for basic training?
Fort Polk, Louisiana.
Tell me about basic.
Well, Fort Polk was the armpit of the world. And basic training, of course, fit right into it, where and of course I was 21 years old. I was drafted late, and that's another story. And when I got there, you know, I'm a school kid. I hadn't had any real hard labor and doing anything, and here they go. They start knocking 20 pounds off of me, and I'm thinking, why is this guy on the end of my nose calling me everything but a white kid, you know? But you soon learn what it's all about. They break you down to build you up. And once you figure that out, it made it a lot easier. If a lot of them fought it all the way through, and they paid for it. You know, we had guys that were continually bucking the drill sergeants, and every rotten job that came up, guess who got it? You know, they did. We had a CO, a conscientious objector, that was on his 4th rotation of basic training. They were going to break this guy, is what they thought. Every time we go to the rifle range or something, of course, he's not touching a rifle. He's just, you know, they had him down pushing up. They had him doing all kinds of stuff all the time. He was picked on constantly. One of the drill sergeants would try to trick him, catch him with his back, and he'd holler, "Hey," and started with a P. I can't remember what his name was. He'd turn around and he just throw an M14 at him. Hit him like this and fall to the ground. He would not. So when we left basic to go to AIT, I don't know how long he was there. I thought, well, get him out of here. He's not going to be any good to you. Don't waste time and money on him. But they were still messing with this poor guy. And they thought, well, he's just pulling this. He truly was a conscientious objector. He objected to it. So, oh, lucky me, I got to pull AIT in the same place. Went from basic training camp to Tigerland. Oh boy, what a deal! And of course the pace picked up, and they'll leave notice. Okay. The pace picked up, and it was what it was. They were teaching us how to survive. They were giving us the tools to be able to survive where we're going.
Now, and what is Tigerland?
It's the AIT advanced.
Hold on.
It's the advanced individual training portion of the military basic.
Why is it called Tigerland?
You know, I don't know. I just got there and they had big tigers on the gates and everything. So I guess maybe it had something to do with the division that it was, or the whatever it happened to be. But it was called Tigerland, and I have no idea.
Is that down in the swamps around there in that area, or what? What's the geography around there?
The soil was sandy. The forests were pine. Very little hardwoods. There were some swampy areas, but not many. But it was one hot booger when it was hot. And it was cold when it was cold. And of course, they always tell you, look out for the snakes. Well, it had them. Had lots of deer, had lots of game down in there. All the training areas were just like any other military base. They were sanitary, you know. The rifle ranges, obstacle courses, quite just like any other training facility. I doubt it was any tougher than guys at Fort Leonard Wood or anywhere else, but it was just a different terrain.
Now, how did your AIT compare to basic? You said it was more intense, or
it ramped up some. in AI, in basic, they handed you an M14, and that's what you trained on and qualified on. In AIT, they handed you an M16, and that's what you trained on. So there was a lot of training on the use and care of the M16. And then they got more into tactics, you know, involved, telling you what to look out for. They'd have Vietnamese that would be on one of the ranges. You'd be all gathered around, this guy'd pop up off the ground out there, and he'd been there the whole time, and you didn't see him. They were teaching you what to look out for, you know, because they could hide behind a blade of grass, and making you fully aware of what you were going to do. When I got to AIT one day, they said, go over to that building over there and see that first lieutenant in there. So I said, oh, what have I done? I went over there. Come in, sit down. I'm thinking, something's not right here. There was 2 or 3 second lieutenants in there. And they said, we've looked at your scores on your testing from when you came in. Said, we see you have an associate's degree in drafting. Yeah. Well, how would you like to go to OCS? I knew what OCS was. I said, OCS, what's that? And they said, Officers Candidate School. I said, well, what's the deal? Well, you have to sign up for another year. That put the no trigger in my mind. and then I said, oh, well, what do you got in mind? And they said, well, we think you'd make an excellent candidate for the combat engineers with your drafting experience. I said, Well, then I'd already decided there's no way. I'm taking my chances. I'm spending 2 years in this man's army, and I'm out of here. So they said, they yelled me about how it would be a good opportunity, and I said, I got just one question. I said, I heard you say combat engineers. Yeah. I said, will it guarantee me that I don't have to go to Vietnam? That lieutenant exploded. He come undone, he jumped up, he got red in the face. He said, get your A out of here. That was my last experience with an opportunity to go to OCS. So back I went, you know, and
did they explain Vietnam to you in basic or AIT?
No. They just tried to train you for the type of warfare that it was.
How aware were you of Vietnam at this time?
Well, it was on the news every day. I mean, you know, by 1969 and 70, we'd been there since, 63 or 4, and we'd see moving pictures of what was happening there. And so we knew exactly what kind of a meat grinder it was going to be. And we heard all the politicians about how important it was that we do what we were supposed to do here. But then when you hit Vietnam for the first time, and it doesn't take long to figure out, we shouldn't have been there. We had no business there. But that was a politically driven deal. And you're aware of that just as well as I am, in that we are not the police force for the world. And that's what they were using us for. When I got there, and when I left AIT.
Now, when did you leave AIT?
April of 70. I was dumb enough to sign up for NCO school, shake and bake. And off to Fort Benning, Georgia we went. Sandy took off from work, and we had a little apartment there, and she came down, and so we had sort of a life in Fort Benning, but NCO school was different in that it started to teach you tactics and maneuvers and that type thing, and also control of the soldier. You know, you're the sergeant, they're the PFC, and so graduated that course, and then they put you on a 3 months OJT. Where'd they send me? Back to Fort Polk to run through an AIT company. So, you know, I got 3 tours at Fort Polk, one at Fort Benning, Georgia. Made good friends in Fort Benning, Georgia, and we all graduated. And of course, when the day came, they put the papers out as to where you're going, you know. 80% to Vietnam, 10% to Korea, some to Germany, and somewhere else. I don't know. It was. We knew where we were going, you know. So they sent us home on leave, and I left Tulsa, Oklahoma on February the 14th, which is Valentine's Day, 1970. Well, family and everything down, and it was snowing, and so we all went down, and other friends of mine from the area, Ron Estes and different friends, all headed down there, got on the same plane, and flew to SeaTac out at Fort Lewis, Washington. Got there, and we were there for 3 days. I understand why Washington State is as beautiful it is. Rains every day. It gets a good drink. Got on a big old 747, and we stopped over in Japan, had a little get out of the plane, and you know, they had all kinds of junk stores there selling you stuff. Got back on the plane and landed at Cameron Bay. How many jillion soldiers have been there? You've been there. Got off there, and they put you in a tent city out there, and next thing you know, they're sending you to a class on hygiene, how to do this, and they're giving you toothbrushes and toothpaste and telling you about all the bad stuff that's out there. You know, you can get this, and you can get that, and you can this, and you never say a word about you can get killed. So in 3 days, why, several of us, they said, called out the names, said, get on that helicopter out there. So we had a duffel bag and fresh, clean teeth and toothbrushes and toothpaste. And they had what they called an orientation. Well, okay, what can you orientate, you know? So we're all fresh, you know, and get in a helicopter and leave Cameron, fly to Chulai. Down there for just a short while, give you another packet of papers. For me and 4 or 5 others, the chopper set down on LZ Debbie. I think it used to be Bronco at one time, but they call it LZ Debbie at Duckfall. And they said, you're now a member of the AmeriCal division. You're a Bravo company, B421. And so I go in, they say, when you get there, go in that building right over there and see the armor. I'm thinking, okay, things are changing. They put all your stuff that you brought with you that you ain't gonna need anymore in a wire cage room in there. Armor comes out, hands you your 16 and your mags and stuff, and your ammo. I mean, you're loaded. And you've been in this nice, quiet world, and now all of a sudden, you're in a world that they can kill you, and you start changing. You know, you go into a different mode. They said, go up this road to that second bunker on the right there. You're going to be there. So, rucksack, not much in it, you know, just a few belongings, poncho liner, and stuff like that. Clean socks, another set of fatigues. They said, go up there, you're going to, and report to so-and-so. Get up there and there's this bunker, and you guys are in there, they got a candle lit and they're playing cards, you know. And there's one up on top and there's a machine gun sitting there, and they say, first thing they say, new meat! You know, new meat! And I'm going, oh, that sounds good. Platoon sergeant there, okay, we became good friends, and they said, well, you know, the bunker's all full, and there was a piece of plywood laying out there. I said, well, I'll just stretch out here. Hadn't slept in a long time. They failed to tell us that, or tell me, it was me and one other guy came in the same time. So I get my piece of plywood. It's long enough and wide enough to make a lay down on, and I throw my liner over me, and I'm sleeping about 2 in the morning. The biggest boom I've ever heard in my life. There was artillery on top of the hill. The road went up and around. 155s let go up there. I'm standing on my feet without touching the ground. I went from prone to standing up in one move. I don't know how. And I'm out there looking around, and some of them guys in that bunker's peeking out, you know. Oh, okay, that's usually explained to you, you know. 3 days we're there, and they got everything you need. They say, well, we're going to be going out in 3 days. I was confused because my thought was that all we had heard is that we are now in a pacification mode. Well, why are we still going out in the boonies if we're in pacification? We drop pamphlets and say, you know, Americans, your friend. And we have Chuhois, we have Vietnamese that were VC at one time, and we have all these things. We have all this firepower, but we still send the grunts in a company out into the bush. So, third night out, we're humping along, getting ready to set up our perimeter for the night. 2 or 3 AK-47s out of the bush had just opened up on us. I went down. Everybody did, and 2 or 3 older guys on either side of me, and moon was pretty bright, and I'm there, and there's a, as you know, hump of mound of ants. Man, I'm down there, and one guy says, what are you doing? I said, man, I'm hid behind this anthill. They can't hit me. He just went to laughing. He says, you'll learn. And so I got shot at my 3rd night in the country. I mean, you know, it wasn't, those guys played John Wayne. They didn't shoot real well. But anyway, that started my adventure into grunt land in Vietnam. And what I come to find out was that our company, Bravo Company, was rebuilding again. We were in an area where they, here again, you know as well as I do, they said, oh, early on back in something back there, they said, oh, you're in good shape. And I said, what's that? They said, well, you're in a free fire zone. I said, what? Well, in some zones in Vietnam, you have to be fired up on or have to have permission to fire upon whoever you think might be the enemy. I said, you've got to be kidding me. He said, nope. But where you're going, you're in free fire zone. Well, that makes me comfortable. Okay.
So free fire zone means
you see them and they've got a weapon, you fire. Okay. You don't have to be fired upon. You can shoot them. I mean, that was the bottom line. And I couldn't believe these guys were telling me this, but that's the way it was. And of course, we soon entrenched. And about a week, I'm the squad leader. That's what they trained us for in NCO school. And I had, instead of 10 a full squad. I never had more than 7, and we were always short. The whole time I was there, we had one guy hit by a bullet. In all the little firefights and skirmishes, we had one guy hit by a bullet. But we were decimated by booby traps. That's that's why the company was rebuilding when I got there. They'd had half a company wiped out in one action, and
What type of booby traps?
hand grenades, black powder explosives. Most of them were small, and the VC were very smart. They're smarter than we were. They would make these little small booby traps that they know would put shrapnel in 2 or 3 guys. Well, you might be on a patrol with your 7-man squad, and you knock down 1 or 2. VC knew that there'll be a chopper there. There'll be more people show up. So they were pretty smart. They put several booby traps out there. I'm sure they thought, well, we'll kill some, but they thought, we'll win by knocking them all down and sending them home with holes all over them, or legs gone, or, something like that. So that's how they did it. I mean, when we hit one, we knew that right close in there, it was probably 2 or 3 more. So the hunt was on. Sometimes we found them, somebody found them with a foot. It was a mess. We always in trouble with it. On June 22nd, 1970, as we had set up close to the beach, the South China Sea, my squad had led in that night to our setting up our perimeter, or setting up for the night. And so it was sandy enough that if you had a shovel, you could dig a little hole and contour where it was comfortable. You didn't have to, and you could be just slightly below grade. Of course, in that sand, whatever was there was trying to bite you, and would usually end up biting you. So bugs and anything in Vietnam had stickers or bugs. We operated mostly between the South China Sea and the first range of mountains. Very seldom did we go up into the mountains. We were more coastal.
How far, what distance?
Oh, probably at where we were, you couldn't see the sea, but it was probably 5 miles over there, and probably 8 to 10 miles wide.
Is this near Duck Folk?
Duck Folk.
Okay.
Yeah. We ranged into the mountains occasionally, but most of ours were down on flat ground around rice paddies and stuff, and the villages and things like that. But on June 22nd, that morning, we were getting ready to leave, and I, out of my hole, sitting on the edge of it, and I rucked up, and the first squad of our company was going to lead out that morning, and the point man was a guy named Bob Gumbert. He was...
What's his name?
Gumbert. Robert Gumbert. He was about a month and a half newer than I was. He was a new guy. Well, of course, he was already old hand. He'd been walking point off and on. All of us had, bottom line. But we all stood up, and they came around us, and Bob Gumbert, Joe Tarowski, and Gary Pete were the first 3 guys in the leading out. And then right behind them was Bill Doncaster, the RTO, and we had an E7 as the company commander at that time. And he was right behind him. And as you know, don't go out the same way you came in. So they headed out and went up, and I just stood up. and boom, huge explosion. Knocked me back into the hole, basically. And I looked up there and I could see what was going on. And we lost 3. And after the investigation, they said it was probably a 250-pound aircraft bomb that didn't blow when it hit, and they fixed it for a booby trap. And they do that stuff. That's the biggest one I was ever involved in. Bob Gumbert, we didn't find. Bob went back to atoms of his creation. Joe was, I say alive. He was on his way. He died a couple of minutes after. Gary Pete was blown into so many pieces we had to scruff him up and put him in a poncho liner. Doncaster had his right arm blown off right here. He was sitting back on his rucksack. And the old sergeant had a piece of shrapnel in his right arm here, and it was bleeding pretty good. It evidently went through and was bleeding pretty good. But everybody else was just knocked down from concussion. Of course, the thing went out and up. And so we had 3 killed in an instant, and I just talked to them. Just walked past us. They just walked past us. Joe and Gary had less than 3 weeks apiece before they went home. They had made it that long, but one of them had 3 weeks and one of them had 2 weeks, and they're gone. And so for us, that was quite a deal. And we had high brass coming out, and what could those jerks do? It was after the fact. So we had to deal with that. First time I realized, when we got back to the LZ, of course you have to have a memorial. So you got 3 M16s on bayonets with steel pots up there, and you walk up there and I think. And before that, I had found that my friend from NCO school had been killed. You're reading them, Stars and Stripes. Yeah. And there's his name, and I go, this was a 25-year-old guy with a master's degree. Shouldn't have been there, but he was. And he did what he was supposed to do while he was there, but he got killed. So that made me angry. I started getting mad about the whole situation. And sometimes that gets you careless, but then we scruffled on through, and we had some successes. We found lots of arms and lots of stores, we had, come to find out, our division had the most WIAs of any in the country.
That wanted in action.
Mm-hmm. And we were running hard for the KIA award too. It was just a mean place. But we got a new captain for the company commander. They said, "Oh, you met the new company commander?" "Yeah, I met him." I said, "What do you think?" "Well, he was a major at one time, but now he's a captain leading a combat company in Bush." I'd already had, before I got hurt, I'd already had one experience with him. We had a Charlie company and Bravo company worked fairly close in the same areas. Well, one day we're out there and they said, the CO says, "Well, we've lost radio contact with Charlie. We don't know where they are, and they don't know where we are." So we're thinking, not good, because it was coming dark. So we set up in our perimeter, and Hagelberger comes over and says, "Well, take a squad out on a little ambush." I said, "Is that a good idea, Captain?" He says, "Why?" I said, "We don't know where Charlie is, and they don't know where we are. And I'm going to take my 7 guys out there and wander around in the dark for a while, and then set up, and I'm going to put a 60 up, and I'm going to put some claymores out. And if something happens to trip or whatever, I'm going to unload. Or I'm out there going along and they hear me and they unload. I don't think that's a good idea. I said, take them out. I said, okay, yes sir. Where do you want me to go? Right here. I said, okay. Went out, immediately made a hard right and went over and found myself a drop of about 4 feet like this in a cut bank. And I said, guys, just suck in for the night. So one of my guys had a starlight scope on his 14, or 16. He's up overlooking. He says, Sarge, I got movement out here. So, you know how they stack up their straw in them big stacks? There's 2 or 3 guys moving around out there around that straw. I thought, oh man, this is not good. Get on the radio and said, I got movement out here. I'm watching them with the starlight. Well, shoot them. I said, do we have Charlie found yet? No. I said, I'm not going to shoot. 3 times I talked to that a-hole. And finally, he said, shoot at him, see what happens. So the guy had the gun. I said, I'll do the shoot. Has it zeroed? He says, heck if I know. I said, okay. So I'm up there, and there's 3 of them standing there shooting the bull, and you have no idea in a starlight how far out there it is or anything else. I let one go, and they all went down. Nothing happened, I'm thinking. Okay, so in a little bit, they're back up again, moving around again. That should have been a hint, you know. So I let go at them again, and they go down. So I said, well, the heck with this. They don't know where we are, and we sure don't know what they are or who they are. Daylight, next morning, the CO says, you need to pop a smoke. What the heck for? Well, we got our radio with Charlie. I said, okay. It was just breaking daylight. And I said, okay, I'm going to stay here until good light. I popped the smoke, and he come back, and they verified the smoke. He said, go on in. We stand up, and we're looking at about 40 yards at a row of claymores, an M60 machine gun, and Charlie Company set up in a circular perimeter out there. And that haystack right in the middle of it. I got up. We walked in through there, and those guys are standing there grinning, you know, laughing. I didn't think it was very funny at the time. Walked up to the company commander, and I said, did I hit anybody? He said, was that you shooting? I said, yeah, it was. He said, it's a good thing you're a sorry shot, because they weren't even close. I said, whew. I said, thank you, sir. He said, did he put you out here? And I said, yes, sir, he did. He said, that'd make me unhappy. We went back to our company. I walked right straight through those guys, right up to Hagelberger, and I said, you sorry SOB? I said, I told you last night this was not a good idea. You'd like to have got us killed, or I could have killed one of our own right out there. He ducked his head, and he never said a word. So, had that little experience with him. Just made E6, getting ready to be the platoon sergeant. We had went up a little mountain out there. One of our guys that morning got hit by a hand grenade booby trap. Put shrapnel in him, dusted him off. Away he went. We get up on the hill up there, and we're looking around, and we see 2 or 3 VC down in that area where that guy got knocked down by the... So we called artillery on him. We just blew the crap out of that area down there. Next morning, July the 31st at daylight, 1970, this sorry sucker comes by and says, take you guys down there and see how many we killed last night. See, we're supposed to be pacifying. We're not supposed to be killing these people, are we? So I says, not a good idea. He should have learned from the first experience, but he didn't. He said, what do you mean not a good idea? I said, what do you think they know? We're coming down to look. That's our MO. We shoot, we bomb, we gotta go count dead bodies. You know, we don't get credit for being a good unit, we get credit for kills. I said, take them down there, and we were getting thirsty, we didn't have water, and there was a spring down there, so we lashed on some extra canteens to pick up some water. I had 7 guys. We're smart enough, we don't walk on the same trails, we don't walk on anything that looks like a trail, you know. You know, I had those little rock walls that they built up, little dividers all through their edges and stuff. Point man hits the first one and it knocks down the first 3 guys.
What was it?
Chicom hand grenade. It had to have been laying
Chinese.
Yeah. Just under the surface, right there by that wall. So the blast was deflected back into us coming down. So I'm working on the other sergeant that happened to be with me there. He's got holes all in him. He's got all kinds of stuff. Point man.
Hold on. Okay.
So down we go. Knowing not good. Point man hits the first one. He over the fence. I can't see him. The next guy back was laying there. He was up so close that most of his damage was in his legs. Next guy back was just peppered all from about here up. So I got 2 really bad down on the ground, so I was down trying to help Sergeant Hewson, pulling out the packs to stop the big bleeding, you know, and this, that, and the other. And I had my radio man was next to last in line. I said, call in a dust off, you know, get it on the way, we need it. My rear security guy went around to go check on the point man. I just stood up looking for more packs. When he went around out there about 4 yards, he hit the second one. I went up in the air and hit it flat on my back in a cloud of dust. He went that way. Out of 7 guys, 5 of us were bleeding. And so the dust off came, and some of the guys from our platoon, the platoon sergeant, headed down the hill. I could see that redhead. He's a carrot top redhead, just a bouncing. Here he was coming. And so the dust off came in, and it was steep enough that he couldn't land, so they had to push us up into the chopper. So here's 1, 2, 3. The 2 guys, the point man had, you've seen it happen. Something can go off right there and you won't get a scratch. He had some shrapnel in his arm, and the other guy that tripped the second one had some shrapnel in his leg, and it didn't seem to be real severe, but we had 3 that were bad. Me, Hewson, and Ewens right there. I mean, boom. So they put us up in the chopper and sent us on our way, and I told Phil Crane, the platoon sergeant, I said, you tell that sorry, and my language was different. I said, you tell that sorry SOB, I was right again. You know, it doesn't do any good, but I was right again. We should not have been there. And so back to the LZ, they drop us in there, and they take the slightly wounded guys off, and the doctor there takes care of them. And the 3 of us are shipped to Chulai, to the big army hospital there. And bring us in, put us on those rows of cots they got there, you know, and start pulling your clothes off of you to assess what's going on. And somebody hollers out, "Where's that guy from Bartlesville?" One of the medical people there comes over and says, "Well, I'm so and so. I graduated from college high in 19 such and such, and yada yada, you know, July, Vietnam, you know." And so pretty soon I guess they figured out what was going on. They could count all the holes in my backside and figured that they didn't stop it below the surface. And so next thing I know, in reality, they said, "Well, you've got some shrapnel in your internal. You're going to go to surgery." Next thing I know, I wake up in the recovery ward with a colostomy hanging out over here. And they tell me, "Well, your colon has been perforated in 4 different places, so we have fixed that." Well, whatever that means, you know. So I spent 7 days there, and they got me ready to transport, and they put me on an airplane and sent me to Japan. Medical facility there at Yokota, I think it was. And they had, all they had done in Vietnam, had sliced open the places in my shoulder and my legs and my back and all that, and cleaned them out and packed them. So when I got to Japan, they said, "Well, you're going to have another surgery here." I said, "For what?" "Well, to fix up your backside for all those wounds you got back there." I said, "They haven't been fixed?" "No." Next day, I called Sandy on one of those lines, you know, and I said, "I'm in Japan and I'm alive. I'm okay." Of course, she gets the little telegram that says your husband's been severely wounded, and then, you know, the cabbie brings it, and I still have it. Anyway, they said, "We're going to clean up your backside and get it all stitched up." Well, what do the yo-yos do? They use stainless steel wire to stitch you up. And I'm going, "Is this good?" I could feel, and they went through and they twisted about 3 times and cut it off. So it's a little stub sticking out. I said, "Boys, how am I couldn't sleep on my right side. I had a colostomy. I didn't sleep well on my left side. I had to lay flat on my back. It'll be all right." Next morning I go, I can't get up. All those little stubbies went right through the sheets into the underbedding on that bed. I called that orderly. I said, "Can't get up." "What do you mean you can't get up?" I said, "I can't get up. I'm stuck to the bed." They had to peel me out one at a time. Then they got the bright idea, "We'll just pad him up with pads." I said, "Fellers, it won't work." Yeah. Next morning, I'm stuck again. Because you know, you're talking about, well, when I got hit, I weighed 210 pounds. When I got to Japan, I weighed 155. I might have lost a lot of weight. And they never could pad that. So finally one day, they said, "Well, about 10 days you're going to have those." And by the time that they had decided that where they had opened me up for the internal, they put big long green stitches all the way across to hold it together and stitches up through here. This Syrian sounding name doctor comes in, Dr. Susari or something. He may be an Indian, I don't know. He says, "We're going to take those stitches out of there today." Fine. He starts snipping. And I said, "Make sure which end you're pulling." "Oh, no sweat." First one, that sucker gets a hold with those deals. He pulled the knot in. I said, "Doc, he's I said, the knot went in. I said, get her done. You gotta get her done. Sounded like a hot iron just going across. Pull that sucker out. That orderly standing there saying, I should have done it. They should have clipped all the knots off. But no, he's a doctor. I told him, I says, let's get it over with. So the orderly says, I'll take these out right here. So he clipped and took care of it. I said, make sure I don't see that doctor again. I'll do what I can. So when they come back about 3 or 4 days later, time for those there, I said, can you do this? And he said, yeah. So I got over on my side, and he just took little dikes, cut them, and think, out they came. I mean, it was just as easy as pie, you know.
Stainless steel things?
Stainless, yeah. So away we went, and I left Japan after about, I think I was there about 12 days, maybe 2 weeks. I was up and mobile, still had a colostomy, still had to bag it. Was eating solid foods, and everything was going. And they said, well, that's when they came in and said, where you want to go in the States? I said, Oklahoma City, Tinker Air Force Base. You can't go. I said, well, get me in the state if you can. They said, well, we think we can get you to Fort Sill. I said, that's in the state. So that's where I ended up. When we went to Dallas, they put me on a little hopper plane and sent me to Fort Sill. And they said, you're the only one we've ever had. I said, well, that's kind of unusual. I thought a guy was an Okie and he was coming back and still needed medical care. He might want to stay here. Nope. And I went. Here comes Dr. Moon, Korean or something. He takes and checks all the records and everything, and he says, of course, Sandy and my parents are there. I'm walking down the hallway towards them, and they didn't know me. Finally, my dad says, that's him. And it was. And so after we'd visited for a while, the doctor comes in, he said, well, I'm going to send you home for 30 days, and then we're going to attempt to re-hook you up here and get your colostomy dealt with. I said, he's a major. I said, no, you're not. And he looks at me, and I said, no, you're not. I said, I've had this thing long enough to know what it is. You fart, you can't control it. You poop, you can't control it. And I said, I'm not going home to my friends and my family with that kind of thing on my side for 30 days. You find somebody that can take care of it. Off he goes. Next day, a captain comes in, and I think his name is, I know it is, Cobb, Dr. Cobb. He says, I hear you're having a little problem. I said, I'm not having any problem. I said, maybe you guys are, but I said, I'm not. He said, I hear you don't want to go home with the colostomy. And I said, would you? He looks and he goes, no. I said, okay. He said, I'm going to be the surgeon that fixes this back. And he said, I can't get you on my surgical schedule for 2 weeks. I said, what's the problem? I said, I got a nice room. I got the groceries. I'm clean, I can wing it for 2 weeks. What's the problem? He said, is that what you want to do? And I said, yes, sir, that's exactly what I want to do. I do not want to go home with this. So he said, okay. And so he says, where are you from? I said, Bartlesville, Oklahoma. He said, do you by chance know Winston and Nadine Summers? I said, sure do. I said, Winston took all my high school pictures. I said, my family's known his, Winston's photography. He said, he's my uncle. I said, you're kidding. He said, nope. He said, he's my uncle. I said, good. And I said, well, I'll tell him when I see him. He said, yeah. And so we had a good visit. He'd been here lots of times, And So we had a good visit, and I was comfortable with him doing what he needed to do. And so he did the surgery, closed up the colostomy, and they tell me, well, it's iffy. I said, me and the good Lord's talked about it. It's a done deal. It's okay. And so here I am today, going down the road. Came back, got life started, rode a lot of motorcycles, and drove nice cars.
And turn it back on.
Ho! Want to back up or not?
Yeah, you said you got back home.
Okay, got back home, got healed up, on the way to life, and 2 kids later, had some issues from the wounds, had to have adhesions in 1977 for colon, and had adhered to the spleen and pinched it off. 1990 had a brain tumor that was pressing against the optic nerve here. Not the kind that Uncle Sam says was caused by Agent Orange, but I believe different. Both kids, Matt had club feet when he was born. That's the kind of defect that has been straightened out. Beth Ann was born as an asthmatic. I don't know whether it was part of it, but those kind of residual things. In 2009, I'm at the VA, and they said, "You're diabetic." I said, "You're crazy. I don't have a history of diabetes in my family. I don't have, what's the symptoms?" I didn't even know what they were. They said, "You are." Sure enough, I had type 2 diabetes. They said, "Well, you were exposed to Agent Orange, were you not?" Oh, leaves are falling off the trees like raindrops, and that doesn't happen natural. When you're walking through it, you're sleeping in it. They said, "Well, we've been having a problem in the last few years. We've been studying Vietnam veterans and finding a huge increase in type 2 diabetes with these guys." Well, what caused it? Well, we believe it was Agent Orange. Add 10% to your disability, doesn't make any difference. So now I have to deal with not only the scars, but type 2 diabetes and the things that go on in here, So, other than that, it's a heck of a life.
When did you get your discharge?
Fort Sill.
When?
October the 20th, 1970.
Would you join the Army again?
Today? No, would not.
If you were young, would you join?
No.
Okay.
Would not. I still think we're in the wrong business. Was the Iraqi thing justifiable or okay? Very iffy. They invaded a country they shouldn't have. Should we have gone in and cleaned them out and owned the country? Yes, just like Vietnam. We should have cleaned up Vietnam and gone to North Vietnam. We should have owned all of Vietnam. When you have politicians running the military, you got issues, you got problems. And even, here again, I don't like saying bad things about people, but Westmoreland, some of the decisions he made were strictly to feed the politicians what they wanted. Was he concerned about ever getting killed over there? Nah, he's okay. But he sends on all the 18, 19, 20, 21 year olds that are there over there for that. Which brings me to my how I got there story. My number was 321. Very high. But I get my draft notice. I come home and I get a job at P&S Engineering over here on the west side of Bartlesville. They manufactured plastics equipment. Bill Province and Bert Sutton ran the company. One day, about 2 weeks after I went to work there, Bill says, "You got a minute?" I said, yeah. Come in, he said, shut the door. And I thought, uh-oh, I'm not going to be here very long or something. He said, I've been debating whether I want to tell you this or not. I said, I'm pretty, you can tell me anything, if it's believable, fine. If it's not, I'll just not say a word and say, well, whatever. He said, well, I was on the draft board. And I said, when you came to apply here and you said what your name was, I knew immediately. And I said, oh, you're the guy I've been looking for. And he sat back and I kind of grinned, what the heck? He said, I will tell you why you were drafted. See, I was 21 going on 22. He said, they send us a number every time we meet that we have to provide so many bodies. And he said, yes, your number was high. But he said, we had already decimated the 18-year-olds, the 19-year-olds, the 20-year-olds, and we're into the 21s and 22s. And you were drafted because we had to fill the quota. I said, well, that's real nice. And he said, well, I debated whether I ought to tell you or not. I said, well, I kind of like to know the reason why, because I said, with that high of a number, I should have never been drafted. But he said, that's the reason why. And of course then shortly thereafter in 70 whatever, we pulled out and left them hanging by a thread out there, and didn't make anybody who'd ever been there happy or proud particularly. But at least I do know the story of the why, And in this, of course, I've got a son now, and I had a son, and he was inquisitive, what about this and what about that? Of course, quite honestly, when he went to school at OSU, he was in another world. And he was in school with Vietnamese people and Korean people and different ethnicities. To this day, he doesn't like Vietnamese, and he probably doesn't know a Vietnamese person. But look what they did to my daddy. Yeah. He doesn't like them. I mean, that's the kid I was talking to. Yeah. He doesn't like them. And I tell him, it's not their fault. It hadn't to do with it. You need not like the government that put us in that situation. Does it say that we should not want to be military? Well, quite honestly, my thought always has been every high school graduate should go to basic training and maybe some more before they're allowed to go on to college. Wouldn't hurt them to spend a year in the military before they go on to college. It teaches discipline. It teaches lots of things. But I understand why they're not willing to sign up. Look at where they're going to end up. They're just like us baby boomers back there. Bright futures, lots of people moving around, doing well, and boom, you're right in the middle of a killing war. We move up to Desert Storm, Gulf, whatever, and wherever we're in Iraq right now, we're in Afghanistan, we're in wherever we're at, and look what's still happening to us. We're getting hell blowed out of us. Whatever we do, we have, I meet guys on the street that's still shocked. Their Humvee was blown up. Their buddies were scattered all over the place. Well, we know that. But the question is, for what? And never answered that question for me. So, that's my take on it. Now, I know I have lots of friends who do lots of good right now. I have friends that ride in the motorcycle thing, that meet the veterans coming home. It's a great thing. When I came home, Did they meet me at the airport? No. In fact, I was lucky enough that I got to come home the way that I did, and I didn't have to go through an airport where they cussed you and spit on you and stuff like that. You may have. So, where's the pride? A lot of Vietnam guys don't have it. I'm not saying we're owed. This world doesn't owe me anything. I make it. I do it. So it's a different world, and I'm glad they're doing what they do for the guys now. And I hope that they are doing better in the mental health business than they did with us. They turned us out on the street. When I got out of there, I walked out and could do anything I darn well pleased.
I was on a mission in Vietnam, and 48 hours later, I was having a beer in Seattle.
There you go. What's wrong with that picture? What's wrong with that picture? They put you together to make you a lean, mean killing machine.
And then turn you loose.
And turn you loose. Yes. And what's your... I, to this day, don't sit in a business with my back to the door. I sit watching the door. Okay? To this day, if Sandy drops something in the kitchen sometime, the sound is enough to make me react, to flinch. After I'd been home just a short while, something went boom, and they're looking around and I'm down. Okay? It doesn't go away overnight. And I thought it did, and I thought I had it whipped, you know. I spent from 1970 to 2007, just as life was just a bowl of cherries. We were working, we had money, we had cars, our kids were doing great, everything. And then all of a sudden, and I have no idea to this day what the trigger was. I think I do. But the next thing I know, I'm the meanest sucker that ever walked on this earth. My kids, to my wife, to anybody, I was no longer civil. I mean, I was just from nice, get along Dean to deadly Dean. And finally, both of my kids were teenage kids at the time. Told my wife, says, Mom, you don't have to stay with that sorry son of a gun. Why don't you leave his sorry ass? That's what my kids told my wife. And I said, me, I'm still, you don't move right. You know. And they said, something's got to happen. I went to the doctor, and I said, Doc, I got something going on here. And I come apart. They did everything they said, and they said, man, you're suffering from depression. Depressed with what? Well, guess what? Another item from Vietnam. So today I take a pill to stay happy. And I'm happy that I do. And I know guys out there who from day one at home have suffered the same way that I did, but not 30 years later. I covered it up. I thought it was the way it was. But now I know different. And so when these guys say, this is it, you need to listen to them close. Because their hell is not over with. We go to my company got back together. A lady put us together for our reunions. She's Bravo Company's angel. I mean, this is what she did. She's a retired school teacher, and she can find anybody. I don't know how she does it and what she does, but she put us together for a Bravo Company reunion, and we had it in St. Louis. 360 guys that had been members of Bravo Company showed up. Bill Doncaster, whose right arm was gone. People who are walking around, people in wheelchairs, all these guys and their wives. And we had the greatest reunion that could ever be had. But you sit and they get in groups and they start talking. And the stories come out about, you remember that day or this, that, and the other. And yeah, it does. And either it was a funny story or it was a serious story. And it gets quiet. And you start looking around and some of them are still suffering. Some of them are still living that day. I still live June 22nd over pretty regularly. But, and I will till the day I die. But it is what it is. So
I like to do a word association.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you some words and you give me your reaction. Mm-hmm. The first one is basic training.
Hell.
Americal division.
Boy, that's tough.
Walking point.
Scary.
Booby trap.
Deadly.
Vietnam.
Hell. Worse than.
Lyndon Johnson.
Sorry. S.O.B.
Richard Nixon.
Even sorrier, if it can get there.
How do you want to be remembered?
As a kind soul. And you know, that can encompass lots of things. I don't want to be remembered like I was before I got medicated. Okay, I don't want that person. I want to be. I see you on the street, I smile and say, "Hey Joe, how are you doing?" That's the guy I want to be. I want to be the person that God wants me to be. Sure, the old body's got some dings. The old mind has got some dents and dings in it. But the me is still here.
Have a few minutes left. Anything else?
Not unless you got the questions. Right?
Well, this is
I probably gave you more than you wanted to know.
Well, this is an excellent interview. I want to thank you for your service and thank you for the interview.
Yeah, you know, I remember my dad, and I know nothing about his service. I don't know what unit he was in. I don't know anything because he never said. I remember all the years it took for Sandy's dad to loosen up and start telling the stories that he did, and I'm full of those memories of him sitting there telling those stories and going, my gosh, this man's a miracle sitting here. Of all those people that were killed that day, he walked out of it, you know. And I think, heroes in life, I've got two. My dad and my father-in-law are the heroes of life that the life we're given and the times. I see a World War II veteran. That's a special man. I see a Korean guy. Sandy's uncle was a Korean guy. They're special people. But here is where we stepped out of the mode in Korea. We went to a place that we shouldn't have gone there. I'm sorry, we should not have gone there. And we started becoming the world's policeman. And we still are in the world police mode. Now, one side says we can't become isolationist, we can become more isolationist than we are, and we should. But we should also not step over into our neighbor's yard and either start a squabble or try to clean up their mess. That's not our job. But here, we think it is. LBJ, you mentioned him. Escalated Vietnam. He had the chance. Kennedy had decided he wanted to pull down out of Vietnam. I mean, in the history, that's, somebody may have killed him for that very fact. Who knows what the real story is on what happened to him? Who profited from his death? LBJ. McNamara profited from his death, and his family had large holdings in military supply. And many other bigwigs profited. Look at the economy. The economy in America has never been stronger than in the Vietnam era.
War's good business.
War's good business. So we're still carrying on that tradition. Our politicians are still carrying on the tradition that war is good business. And then we have a guy like the one we got now that comes in here that has no clue whatsoever of what. He doesn't listen to the military. He doesn't listen to the Congress. He just flies whatever plane he thinks is right. And he's going to force you to do that. So, what war do we really have going on? We got one right in our yard here that needs to be straightened up. And unless we squawk and squeal, it will go on status quo.
Anyway, again, I want to thank you for your service and thank you for the interview. And again, this is January 30th, 2015. My name is Joe Todd. This has been an interview with Dean Haberly in Dewey, Oklahoma. Thank you.
Thank you.